Mr. Thomas just bought a colt. The donkey will later bring his wares. Mr. Thomas usually passes through a tunnel that goes through the mountain to get to the village on the other side of the mountain. Mr. Thomas's donkey was named John. According to Mr. Thomas, John was very beautiful because of his long, pointed ears. John's nose is also very soft. Today is John's first day at work. Mr. Thomas put the merchandise on John's back, then led him to walk towards the tunnel at the foot of the mountain. At first, everything went smoothly. But when going through the tunnel, John suddenly did not want to walk anymore. He was silent in front of the tunnel. Mr. Thomas tried to push John's body to get into the tunnel, but the colt persisted. Mr. Thomas finally realized something. Wow, I just realized this tunnel is a bit low. John can't get through because his ears will get stuck in the roof of the tunnel, cried Mr. Thomas. Mr. Thomas tried to persuade John. He stroked John's head and whispered, "John dear, you need to tuck your ears so we can get through this tunnel. We have to take these merchandise to the other side of the village." Unfortunately, as a donkey, John is very stubborn. He did not want to hear Mr. Thomas's orders. He remained standing with his ears erect. He didn't want to bend his beautiful ears at all. Mr. Thomas was very confused. He thought for a moment and finally came up with an idea. He opened his wares on John's back and looked for something. Finally, Mr. Thomas found a chisel. He then started working. Mr. Thomas carved 2 grooves in the ceiling of the stone tunnel. He intended to make 2 grooves along the length of the tunnel, all the way to the other end. The 2 grooves were about enough for John's ears to pass through. The 2 grooves will be like rails for John's ears. Not long after Mr. Thomas started working, suddenly a policeman came. "Sorry, Mr. Thomas. You can't carelessly carve tunnels. This is a violation of the law. Because you damaged public facilities," said the policeman. Mr. Thomas is very confused about being accused of breaking the law. "John, my donkey, cannot pass under this tunnel. The ears are too long. I just made 2 grooves in the roof of the tunnel so that his ears can pass," explained Mr. Thomas. The policeman took off his hat and scratched his head in confusion. He thought, what should he do to help Mr. Thomas? Finally, he got an idea. "Mr. Thomas, do you have a shovel? If you have one, you'd better dig the ground along this tunnel. The thickness of the excavation is sufficient so that there is a niche to the end of the tunnel, so John can pass without bending his ears." Policeman's advice. Unfortunately, Mr. Thomas's thinking is really simple. He even pouted and grumbled, "Why do I have to dig the ground to make a niche? Didn't the policeman see? It's John's ears that are long, not his feet." The policeman doesn't want to waste time. He didn't care what Mr. Thomas thought. The policeman immediately dug a thin depression in the ground along the tunnel. Mr. Thomas was forced to help him. Moments later, their work was done. Now it appears that there is a thin ditch along the tunnel. John was able to pass in the tunnel with merchandise. His ears remained erect without touching the ceiling of the tunnel.